A deserted plain in the middle of Egypt, hundreds of miles from the famous sites of Cairo and Luxor. There are no tourists here, and yet below the ground lie the ruins of a great lost city. Archaeologists are unearthing evidence of open-air temples and works of art unlike any from ancient Egypt. Remote tombs reveal strange images, echoes of a revolutionary cult that dominated ancient lives. Over 3,000 years ago, this desolate landscape was the capital of the mighty Egyptian Empire. What happened here, and why has so little survived? This is the story of one of the most traumatic episodes in the whole of ancient Egyptian history. Under these sands lie the ruins of a religious experiment that rocked the Egyptian empire to its foundations. For many at the time, it seemed to promise a heaven on earth. For many others, it became their worst nightmare. The mysterious ruins were discovered last century in Amarna in Middle Egypt, far from Cairo in the north and Luxor in the south. The first strange clues to this lost city were found in tombs hewn in the surrounding cliffs. The walls of this tomb are covered with unusual reliefs. This relief shows a king and his wife. We know it's a royal couple because of the clothes they're wearing, but we can't tell who they are. Their faces have been chiseled out. Even their names were hacked away. But a clue to their identity lay in the sagging belly of the pharaoh and in the image of the sun bathing the royal couple in sunlight. These had a familiar look. Similar images appear on the throne of the most famous pharaoh of all, Tutankhamun. Maybe Tutankhamun and the faceless pharaoh were closely related? Some even suggested they were father and son. The mystery king and queen were finally identified when undamaged reliefs were found in the Amarna ruins. He was Akhenaten, an enigmatic pharaoh held by some as a visionary, branded by others as a heretic and a criminal. She was Nefertiti, one of the most beautiful women of the ancient world, and also one of the most powerful.
Nefertiti, even while she's queen, is shown doing things in ways that other queens never are. She wears pharaoh's crowns, which other queens do not, even while she's still queen. She is shown in one case smiting her enemies, just like a pharaoh does. No other queen is shown this way.
Akhenaten and Nefertiti were husband and wife. They ruled Egypt in the middle of the 14th century BC, just 20 years before Tutankhamun. And yet, for all their importance, they might as well never have lived. This is a temple at Abydos, 60 miles north of Luxor. It contains a list of the kings of ancient Egypt published by Seti I. But the list is incomplete. There is no mention of Akhenaten. This is the name of his predecessor, Amenhotep III. Akhenaten's own name should be next, but it's missing. The list jumps straight to the next dynasty. It turns out there was an active campaign to erase Akhenaten's reign from ancient Egyptian history.
Whenever it was necessary to refer to this period or to Akhenaten himself, he was only referred to as the heretic.
What did Akhenaten do that was so terrible? Akhenaten and Nefertiti first made a name for themselves in Thebes, the capital of Egypt during the 14th century BC. The conquest of foreign lands, from Sudan in the south to present-day Syria in the north, had brought untold power and riches to the Egyptian empire. Thebes, modern-day Luxor, was its capital, and Karnak its main temple. Larger than the Vatican, Karnak was built more than 3,000 years ago, when Egypt's religion was polytheism, belief in many gods. The king, with his priests, prayed to these gods on behalf of his people. In Thebes, the most important god was Amun. Symbolized by his two-feathered crown, he was a god of fertility and creation. Each year, the Amun cult staged a popular procession along the River Nile of floating shrines with statues of the gods. All that came to an abrupt end when Akhenaten became king around 1353 BC. In a startling move, he abandoned Amun in favor of a different god. The Aten, or sun disk. The sun god was as old as ancient Egypt. He had been worshipped by the first dynasties 1,000 years earlier, during the time of the pyramids. Akhenaten's decision would have shocked the influential army of Amun-worshipping priests. They expected their pharaoh to worship Amun above all other gods. Akhenaten was refusing to do that. Worse still, he was actually promoting another god to rival status. What possessed the king to scorn the established god of Thebes? There's evidence that his father, the previous king, Amenhotep III, was already leaning towards sun worship. These are colossal statues of Amenhotep III himself. They were built during his lifetime out of a very special stone. It's quartzite, and the pharaoh had to transport it at huge expense from quarries many miles from here. What made it so desirable was its golden, glowing color. Quartzite was associated by the ancient Egyptians with the sun god. The statues were also positioned to catch the first gleam of light from the rising sun. Such overt homage to the sun god was unusual at the time, but that's as far as this pharaoh dared to go. His son Akhenaten had no such qualms. He believed the sun deserved its own full-blown cult. Five years into his reign, Akhenaten unleashed another shockwave. Thebes, he announced, was too closely linked to Amun and so unsuitable for the Aten. The sun disk needed its own holy city. The existing capital of the Egyptian empire had to be abandoned. To the consternation of the priests, Akhenaten and a small band of loyal nobles left Thebes in search of a new capital. After scouring the length of the Nile, he came upon a site in the middle of Egypt. It was exactly halfway between Thebes and Memphis, about 170 miles from each. The shore where Akhenaten landed is in a region now called Amarna. The villagers live in a fertile stretch of land on the east bank of the Nile. Beyond it lies a forbidding plain surrounded by cliffs. It was as bleak then as it is today. No one would dream of running the Egyptian empire from such a desolate and remote spot, yet it was here that Akhenaten decided to build his new capital. The king must have been aware that the move would come as a shock to his subjects, because he went to great lengths to justify his decision. He gave his reasons in writing. They can still be read today, in an unexpected place, atop one of the cliffs overlooking the city. A symbol of the Aten has been carved into the rock as a boundary marker. Below it is a text. It says that His Majesty found here the place of origin of the Aten, after arriving mounted on a great chariot of gold and silver. Why did Akhenaten think that this was the birthplace of the Aten? He and his supporters arrived here with only tents for accommodation. This truly was virgin land, with no links to any other gods. And the king found something even more convincing. In Egyptian belief, the horizon where the sun rose was called the Akhet. It was symbolized by two mountain peaks, with the sun disk rising between them. The hills that surround the Amarna plain are suddenly interrupted by a break in the cliffs. A sight to behold, especially at dawn. The king must have thought he'd found the sacred birthplace of the sun god. He named his city Akhet Aten, horizon of the sun disk. The site has been buried for over 3,000 years, but this century, excavators have unearthed the remains of over 100 buildings. It's now possible to virtually recreate the entire city. Even the interior decoration can be determined from fragments of color on tomb columns. In the heart of the city stood the temple to the Aten, right next to the king's house and throne room. The finished interiors were in stark contrast to the barracks-like exteriors, but this was a city built in a hurry. There was still scaffolding around when the royal family moved in. It's rare to find remains of ancient Egyptian dwellings. These ruins can actually offer a glimpse into how a middle-class family lived. This one was the home of a sculptor called Thutmose. It's typical of dozens of houses subsidized by Akhenaten to lure the middle classes here, the first planned suburb in history. Here was a comfortable lifestyle, at least for the grown-ups. This was the master bedroom with its own bathroom, but no such luck for the children. It's likely they had to sleep with the servants. Although Akhet Aten was long ago abandoned, there's still life in the area. This circle in the sands is an old well, one of many found in private homes. These wells provided clean drinking water and allowed bricks of dry mud to be made on the spot. They were handy, too, for watering the garden. No self-respecting resident could afford to be without one. But Akhenaten didn't come to this forsaken place to win a town planning award. He came to build a holy city to the sun god. And he charged his best artist with the job of turning his dream into reality. Tutmosis was the king's favorite sculptor. It was in his workshop, in this very corner, that a German expedition in 1912 made a wonderful find. This bust of Nefertiti had been buried under rubble for more than 3,000 years. It's a work of art unlike any in ancient Egypt and underlines the importance Akhenaten attached to perfection. No one knows why one eye is missing. Most experts now think it fell out in antiquity. Maybe it's still out there, waiting to be discovered. Akhenaten's pursuit of perfection was single-minded. Buildings, too, had a role to play. These are the remains of a palace. When it was first excavated, the walls in this room were found covered with fragments of a mural that has now been reconstructed. The room opened onto a secluded garden court. The best preserved examples of Akhenaten's devotion to the Aten are to be found inside the nobles' tombs. This one was never finished, but it shows how the stonemasons carved the columns straight out of the rock. It was built by a military officer called Ai, probably Nefertiti's father, for himself and his wife when the time came. The highlight of the tomb is a religious text carved on one of the walls. It's a hymn by Akhenaten dedicated to the sun god Aten. What's so remarkable is its similarity to a psalm in one of the world's most sacred books, the Bible.
O living sun disk, thou art beautiful, great, glittering. When thy movements fade, the land is in darkness. Every lion is out of his den. O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty. Thou makest darkness, and it is night. The young lions roar after their prey.
It strikes you when you read those texts very much like a religious revelation, a flash of insight that a prophet might receive from his God.
The hymn to the Aten is more amazing still, because it anticipates the central belief of the Bible. This hymn is the very first recorded expression of monotheism, the belief that there is only one true God. Because of his monotheism, Akhenaten comes across as a religious visionary ahead of his time, a forerunner of the great prophets of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And yet Akhenaten's revolution had barely begun. His goal was to reform ritual as well as belief. The Aten was worshipped right here in this temple. As in other cults, ordinary people were kept out of the temple. Only Akhenaten and his priests could enter the inner sanctuary. But Akhenaten came up with a new idea for including the people in the worship of the Aten. An aerial view of the Amarna region shows that the king had boundary stones installed to define the city limits. There were also definite axes pointing east and north. When architect Michael Mallinson analyzed a recent survey of Amarna by the Egypt Exploration Society, he noticed that the boundary stones and the temples formed a series of perfect rectangles. What did it all mean? There's a clue in the geometry of the temple itself. Its proportions, when projected out, are the same as those of the city limits. It's as if the whole city had been made into a temple.
Everyone can see the horizon of the Aten where the god first appears, and it can be worshipped as such. He's opening it all out, so suddenly it's all apparent, it's all visible. So it's gone from being a religion which is closed to a religion which is open, and that's completely consistent with the way he himself represents his religion.
It seemed as if ordinary Egyptians may have ignored Akhenaten's offer. Excavations at a workers' village suggest a reluctance to give up the old and familiar ways.
There was still a certain amount of worship of traditional gods, or there were certainly chapels, and there is evidence for various fertility gods and things associated with the ordinary people, which may suggest that they weren't that interested in Artenism.
Akhenaten soon began to provoke greater controversy by changing the status of the king himself. The ancient Egyptians saw their kings as a vital link between the gods and humankind. It seems that Akhenaten was aspiring to a much more exalted position. This is one of the most frequent reliefs found at Akhenaten. It shows the royal couple at a balcony handing out gifts to members of the nobility. Thanks to copies made when they were in better condition, such scenes can now be recreated. This one is known by Egyptologists as a window of appearance. It shows Nefertiti's presumed father, Ai, being rewarded for his loyal support. Although it looks like a secular palace ceremony, new finds suggest that this ritual had heavy religious overtones. Recently, a team from the Egypt Exploration Society, run in the field by Kate Spence, found some intriguing foundations in an area of the city known as the North Palace. Among the finds were the bases of large-scale statues. They hinted at a major complex. Just how important a complex became clear when tiny fragments of a precious metal were found.
There you are, a nice big bit of gold leaf coming out in front of your very eyes.
It was the first trace of gold found at the North Palace since the 1920s and was evidence of something special and religious.
It was associated with the sun and with the flesh of the gods, and the fact that it shines, that when light falls on it, it reflects off it, was very important for the Egyptians.
The golden statues could only be of Akhenaten. Kate Spence also discovered that they had stood next to the base of another mysterious structure. She's now recovered it with sand to protect it from the elements.
The gypsum foundations are extremely well preserved. We've also been getting a lot of fragments of gold leaf, which show that it was a very, very important architectural structure, probably a big gilded gateway.
The whole structure bore the hallmarks of one of the balconies where the nobles received their gifts. So what were the religious overtones of this ceremony? A vital clue lay in the strange orientation of the palace. It was aligned to the east, Usually only temples pointed east. Perhaps the palace was intended to be like a temple, but who then was the object of worship?
As one enters the building, one is approaching directly towards the king, who is therefore set up in a similar sort of way to a cult image in a temple, and where he appears as a divine or semi-divine figure.
Hardly the style of a humble prophet, more like the delusions of a megalomaniac. What exactly was going through Akhenaten's mind? An insight into his thinking can be gleaned from his tomb. Like all pharaohs, Akhenaten built his tomb while he was still alive. The nobles' tombs in the Amarna plain were cut into the surrounding cliffs, but not Akhenaten's. He built his 4 miles further east, deep into a valley that winds its way through the desert. It's always been a mystery why the royal tomb is so remote. When first discovered earlier this century, it was virtually empty. But there was one bit of treasure that couldn't be removed: the reliefs. And they reveal much about Akhenaten's religious ideas. This damaged relief shows the king and queen carved in an unflattering style with sagging stomachs and ample thighs, a far cry from the idealized picture of royalty usually seen on tomb paintings. In these and other reliefs, the king and queen are also shown revealingly naked, in defiance of the normal conventions of Egyptian art.
Imagine, for example, if a future king and queen of England had themselves portrayed nude. It would be quite a shock. And I think this was probably the same sort of thing for the Egyptians. There is a reason why Akhenaten is shown this way. Akhenaten was trying to show the royal family as different from the rest of mankind, closer to the gods.
And there was another telling difference. Egyptian tomb paintings, like this one in Thebes, usually show highly formal scenes of the pharaoh about to enter the afterlife, his destiny very much in the hands of the gods. Akhenaten's reliefs depict surprisingly intimate and informal scenes in which the members of the royal family itself, not the gods, are the center of attention. In this scene, the king and queen are shown mourning the death of a daughter. Here, Akhenaten is seen dining with his mother. And here, Akhenaten and Nefertiti are seen exchanging affectionate glances.
I think the purpose was to convey to the ancient Egyptians that here you have not only the model of human life, but also the source of all love. And so the idea, of course, is that all life flows from Akhenaten and Nefertiti, just as it originally did from the gods.
No pharaoh had ever associated himself with a god as closely as Akhenaten, and yet there are signs that he was aiming higher still. Akhenaten's ultimate ambition is revealed in a radically new view of the afterlife. Traditionally, the spirit of the dead was believed to set in the west with the dying sun. It then journeyed into the nether worlds of the night, where it would meet Osiris, the god of resurrection, and receive the power of rebirth.
In the morning, as the sun rose in the east, so too the spirit would rise from the door of its tomb and come out to live among the living. This was the ancient Egyptian idea of paradise.
Akhenaten, it seems, was quite prepared to undermine this cherished belief. The key to his view lies in the puzzling location of the royal tomb. The recent survey of the region reveals that it lies on the same axis as the temple to the Aten. and the valley that leads to the tomb is the same break in the cliffs which to Akhenaten looks so much like the sacred Akhet, or horizon of the sun disk.
The Akhet in ancient Egyptian belief was a place in which the sun spent perhaps as much as an hour before rising in the morning. Now, this was not just a zone of transition between the netherworld and the world of the day. It was a place also where the sun received the final effective form that it needed to come to life again in the morning.
The royal tomb was situated in the very birthplace of the Aten. Why? There's a clue in a major relief on the walls of the royal tomb. It shows the Aten rising in the Akhet. Its rays radiate out, breathing life into every street and house in the city. The final piece in the jigsaw comes from the survey of the royal tomb's relation to all the other boundary markers. The tomb's position suddenly makes sense. The magical birthplace of the sun god and the royal tomb appear to be one and the same. The message was loud and clear. Akhenaten's soul would rise as one with the Aten, bypassing the journey to the underworld to meet Osiris, the god of resurrection. This was heresy and must have frightened Egyptians of the day.
The common people, laborers working on this tomb, would have been very worried about what's going to happen to them in the next world. Where now is their guarantee of rebirth if Osiris is in fact non-existent, if there is no Osiris?
Later dynasties branded Akhenaten a criminal as well as a heretic. Why? For starters, there are signs his final objective was to wipe out 2,000 years of Egyptian religion. The first casualty was the Opet festival in Thebes, with its pageant of statues of gods paraded from temple to temple along the Nile. Akhenaten canceled the ritual when he moved to Middle Egypt, which must have incensed the people and left a void in their lives. Perhaps even more offensive was what Akhenaten decided to put in its place. Another frequent relief found in the city depicts the royal family driving chariots. These drives were no Sunday afternoon jaunts in the country, but stately parades from temple to temple along the royal road.
Instead of having processions of divine images, you're having processions of the king himself. That's a fairly meaningful act, to swap the procession of the god for yourself in a chariot.
There's no record of what people thought of their king's behavior, at least not officially. But this figurine of a chariot was found in the Amarna ruins, driven not by the king, but by a monkey. It's the only evidence of descent unearthed to date, surprising in light of the massive scale of Akhenaten's reforms. A close look at the chariot scenes reveals why. Armed troops escort every chariot procession, ready to squash any signs of protest. But even this show of force only hinted at the magnitude of Akhenaten's designs on Egyptian religion. After about 10 years in power, he issued the most brutal edict of his reign, the desecration of all the old gods of Egypt. Akhenaten attacked every shrine in the land. Back in Thebes, the god Amun bore the brunt of this backlash. In a fit of jealousy, without precedent in ancient Egypt, Akhenaten targeted every reference to Amun. It wasn't just the colossal statues that were damaged. Even in small scenes like this one, the god's face was hacked out. Inscriptions on the top of obelisks were full of references to Amun. Although barely visible from the ground, they had to go. A climate of fear now pervaded the land. This amulet was found in the ruins of a house in Amarna. It had Amun written on it. Its owner felt it was perhaps wiser to censor the word.
There is, in the history of the world, a number of movements, communism, Nazism. I think they all, in the beginning, infect people with a new way of looking at things and bring people along with them. But it seems to be common human nature that eventually what is a liberating theology becomes restrictive. You can no longer accept alternative ideas. You must only accept one idea. And at this point, fanaticism starts. And what's interesting about Amarna is you can see it happening in human history for the first time.
This was the nightmare which later dynasties branded a heresy and a crime. This was the trauma they wiped from their history. How it came to an end and who erased the memory is shrouded in mystery. But here and there, one can still hear faint echoes of a violent aftermath. In his late 30s, and after 17 years of absolute rule, Akhenaten disappears from the records. No one knows what happened. The royal tomb was found empty. Some believe he was a victim of a plague then raging. Others claim he died a natural death. A new theory suggests he may have been the victim of a conspiracy. Kings were murdered in antiquity. In Egypt's case, the facts are sparse. But Nicholas Reeves, a world-renowned expert on the 18th dynasty, believes the possibility can't be ruled out.
In the Middle Kingdom, the 12th dynasty, Amenemhet I was murdered. We have this, we know this from a document, a literary text. And we know also of a harem conspiracy against King Ramesses III of the 20th dynasty. Such things were, I suspect, not uncommon.
Was there a traitor within Akhenaten's court? His successors would have had much to gain. No one knows who did succeed him to the throne of Egypt. One candidate is an obscure pharaoh by the name of Smenkhare. Some argue that he was a younger brother or son of Akhenaten, but others claim that he never existed and that Smenkhare was a pseudonym for someone else.
It's only recently that we've begun to realize that, in fact, Nefertiti played quite a powerful political role. Akhenaten appointed Nefertiti as his co-regent to rule beside him partway through the reign. And the likelihood is that following Akhenaten's death, she continued to rule in her own right, adopting a new name, Smenkhare.
Whoever succeeded Akhenaten had a short-lived reign, dying soon after being crowned. What is known is the identity of the next pharaoh, a boy of 9 who ruled Egypt for a decade. Tutankhamun's parents are a mystery. Many think he was Akhenaten's only son, born to him by a lesser wife. His fame today stems from the wonderful treasures discovered just over 75 years ago. It's thought that Tutankhamun died too young to play a major part in history, but the boy king in fact presided over one of the most critical periods in his country's past. As king, he faced an agonizing decision: to champion his father's ideals or to steer Egypt back to normality. which side of the fence did he come down on? It is known that the old religion returned during Tutankhamun's reign. This is the Boy King's throne. It has a cartouche with his original name, Tutankhaten, living image of the sun disk. But the other side of the chair shows that he later changed his name to living image of Amun, Tutankhamun. Yet the restoration could not have been carried out by Tutankhamun himself. He was too young. The affairs of state were in the hands of a close relative, the father of Nefertiti, the officer Ai. It was he, a former ally of Akhenaten, who in fact renewed the cult of Amun. Ai was due to hand over power when Tutankhamun came of age. Instead, the boy king met a premature death, and Ai himself acceded to the throne of Egypt. Tutankhamun died at the age of 18. The cause of his death is a mystery, but theories of foul play abound. One of the most sinister points the finger directly at Ai.
What's interesting is that when Tutankhamun is of an age to entertain his own ideas as to how things should be, this is precisely the time when he disappears. These ideas may well not have fitted in with the way forward that I envisaged. Could it be that Tutankhamun was in fact very much a chip off the old block, and the early death of the boy king saved Egypt from another round of heretical fantasy and destruction?
Tutankhamun's death proved a watershed. Pharaoh after pharaoh obliterated the memory of Akhenaten and his heresy. The whole city of Akhenaten was dismantled stone block by stone block, leaving only the mud brick inner walls. Ancient Egyptians must have thought they'd heard the last of Akhenaten. But in 1907, excavators stumbled upon a strange royal tomb, not in Amarna, but in Luxor, in the Valley of the Kings. It was found strewn with broken furniture. Tomb 55, as it is known, dated from Tutankhamun's reign, so it must have housed a family relation. But who? The coffin was moved to the Cairo Museum, but it was impossible to tell who it belonged to. The mask had been torn off. Even the name had been chiseled out. There were no clues to its identity except inside. The skull and bones of an adult male.
When we first examined this,
was the body related to Tutankhamun? DNA tests on the fragile tissues have not yet been allowed, but Dr. Nasri Iskander was one of a team of forensic experts who compared an X-ray of Tutankhamun's skull, shown here on the left, with an X-ray of the mystery skull, shown here on the right.
now this one is very close to this one, and according to some dimensions we are measuring and some angles of the mantle and some parts of this skull, we have found that this is a first-degree relationship. It means it is father, son, brother, or something like that. This is first degree.
Early experts thought the bones were those of a young man and argued that the body was therefore Smenkhare, the presumed younger brother or son of Akhenaten. Of course, if Smenkhare was in fact Nefertiti, this would be impossible. But a recent reassessment of the age of the teeth has led many to reject the Smenkhare idea. The age of death is now thought to be between 35 and 40.
My own view is that the body from Tomb 55 so far as one can judge from the archaeological evidence, is the body of Akhenaten himself. Why Akhenaten's body should later turn up at Thebes is a bit of a mystery. But I think what seems to have happened was that when the Amarna capital was abandoned, Tutankhamun took it upon himself to transfer the bodies back to Thebes.
Akhenaten died around 1336 BC. Tomb 55 was found 200 years later during the digging of another tomb. If it was Akhenaten's, perhaps the sight of the heretic caused revulsion and the coffin's desecration. Only then was Akhenaten truly forgotten. But his ideas didn't die. They lay dormant. The vision of one true God resurfaced a few centuries later in the revelations of a prophet named Moses, who led his people out of Egypt to the Promised Land. The single God of Moses has been the bedrock of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faith ever since. Akhenaten's own religious experiment may have crumbled to dust, but the dream of a holy city fit for the one true God never faded. It continued to haunt the minds of visionaries and fanatics through the ages, right down to the present day.